Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump withdraws Congresswoman Elise Stefanik's nomination for U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. The president revealing the reason for the decision on Truth Social. Iris Tao is at the White House with more details for us. The FBI announces it arrested one of the highest level MS-13 gang leaders in the U.S. That's as Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem addresses media in front of alleged gang members in El Salvador. Our international correspondent is in Latin America with the immigration update. On Capitol Hill, the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs comes under review as Republican lawmakers push ahead with efforts to codify government spending cuts. Luis Martinez has the highlights from that hearing and how House Democrats are pushing back. Sirens sound in Israel as the Houthis claim to fire more missiles at the country. This comes as Israeli forces find themselves operating in multiple countries and territories. Jason Perry reports. The U.S. and EU are split on the Russia threat. Some EU countries fear a direct attack on their land, while the U.S. labels that concern as unfounded. David Vives in Paris.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump has withdrawn the nomination of Representative Elise Stefanik as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. The president announced the move today on Truth Social. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. Tell us more about the president's announcement.
Good evening to you as well, Tiff. So today, President Trump announced that he's pulling back his nomination for Congressman Elise Stefanik to become his next ambassador to the United Nations. And this is a surprising turnaround as we know, Stefanik was Trump's first cabinet pick announced after winning the election, and she is expected to be confirmed in the Senate in just the coming days. And in fact, as of yesterday, she was still posting about her cabinet colleagues, of course, to be in administration. But today, Trump, while announcing his decision, cited two key factors. One is the slim majority held by House Republicans in Congress, and two is the uncertainty with the special election in New York to fill Stefanik's seat. And he says that House Speaker Mike Johnson, meanwhile, will be thrilled to have Stefanik back in Congress. And Johnson adds that she will be able to get a new position on the House leadership team. And when it comes to her potential administration role, Trump says she will be able to come back to work for the administration in the future. Tiff.
And Iris, what is the House majority looking like right now? How does it impact Trump's agenda?
Sure. So the House majority has been reduced to 218 to 215, a mere 3-seat advantage held by Republicans. And that's after Congressman Mike Waltz resigned to become Trump's national security advisor, and after Matt Gaetz also resigned after he was picked by Trump to be the next attorney general. But of course, that's before he pulled out himself, saying that he doesn't want to become a distraction for the Trump administration. And meanwhile, Trump, in explaining his move today, also says that it's essential that we maintain every Republican seat in Congress, and that is to pass the items on his agenda, for example, to pass tax cuts as well as economic policies, border policies, and foreign policies when it comes to what he calls peace through strength. And today's move is an indication that the White House is recognizing the challenges posed by the slim House majority, especially after what we have seen over the past few months amid House budget fights. And tonight, President Trump is attending two virtual rallies to support his picks to fill the 2 congressional seats in Florida. And that's another sign that the House majority, despite slim, will be key to President Trump and the White House. Tiff.
All right, Iris, thanks for those updates. The FBI today announcing they arrested one of the highest level MS-13 gang leaders in the U.S. That's as Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem addresses media in front of alleged gang members in El Salvador. NTD's international correspondent has the immigration update from Latin America.
He is an illegal alien from El Salvador.
The FBI on Thursday arresting a 24-year-old man suspected of being a leader of the MS-13 gang. The Bureau didn't release his name. Attorney General Pam Bondi says the suspect is the highest level leader of the gang on the East Coast.
And the most important thing, all of our agents were safe this morning, all of our law enforcement officers, and the bad guy is in jail.
Now, the MS-13 gang was formed in Los Angeles, but its goal was to protect immigrants from El Salvador from other gangs in Los Angeles, and many of those immigrants entered the U.S. illegally. Nowadays, members of the violent street gang are a danger to civilians in the U.S., in Canada, as well as here in Latin America. President Trump took to social media, commenting on the arrest. He praised Bondi, FBI Director Kash Patel, Border Czar Tom Homan, and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem for capturing the suspect, calling it a big deal. He was arrested in Virginia, just south of Washington, D.C. Many MS-13 members are being held in a mega prison in El Salvador. Homeland Security Chief Noem visited the prison on Wednesday. Among the detainees are alleged gang members who've been deported from the U.S.
Do not come to our country illegally. You will be removed and you will be prosecuted. But know that this facility is one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use if you commit crimes against the American people.
Some of the deported suspects in the El Salvador prison are from Venezuela. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that's because the Venezuelan regime of Nicolas Maduro wasn't taking back its own citizens.
Well, they have an obligation. If you are a country and someone is illegally in another country, you have an obligation to take those people back, whether they're criminals or not. Venezuela said they wouldn't take them back. So we had to find a place to send them, especially the ones that had records.
And in other immigration-related news, the University of Alabama tells NTD that a doctoral student has been detained off campus by federal immigration authorities. According to reports, Iranian citizen Ali Reza Durradi had his student visa revoked and was arrested this week. This comes after 2 other foreign students in different parts of the country have been detained as well. They previously participated in pro-Palestine activities on campus. The cases made national headlines earlier this month. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Republican lawmakers continue their review of government agencies as they prepare to codify spending cuts. Today, they scrutinized the State Department bureau that counters illicit narcotics. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on the story.
That INL can make improvements looking at their performance management, their program monitoring, and also their program evaluation. These are 3 key areas where we believe INL programs could do a better job ensuring that the activities that they're funding are meeting the strategic goals that the U.S. government is trying to achieve as efficiently as possible, that they are monitoring the program implementation in real time.
House Democrats pushed back against the review of the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs and defended the role that DEI has played in government agencies thus far.
Well, there is something that seems so strange to me, diversity. We have in the motto in the United States of America, e pluribus unum, out of many we are one. When we talk about inclusivity as opposed to exclusivity, we want to make sure you can bring your tired, your poor, your huddled masses that yearn to breathe free. America is a composite nation.
Spending cuts have not yet been enacted but are expected, and House Democrats have accused Republicans of endangering the mission of the INL and law enforcement across the Western Hemisphere.
Well, you heard Mr. Isaacson say that we're working at cross purposes. By cutting INL, you are taking away the ability to go after what you said you wanted to do, which was cutting back on fentanyl. That's not happening. In the meantime, you're doing tariffs that hurt people at home as well as Mexico.
Chairwoman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Western Hemisphere, Maria Elvira Salazar, dismissed the arguments of Democrats and threw her support behind the review of the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs.
But is not cutting the funds, is reviewing where they're investing their money and doing what we're doing across the federal budget, is cutting waste, abuse, and fraud. And then we're going to fund those programs that will definitely do what INL is there for. We cannot give money to INL to do hip-hop programs or to teach the Salvadorian police the difference between the pronouns or gender ideology.
The Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs is an agency that falls under the purview of the Department of State and has an annual budget of around $1.6 billion. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Sirens sounded in Israel today as the Houthi terrorist group in Yemen fired more missiles at the country. This comes as Israeli forces continue operations in multiple countries and territories. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest updates.
In Jerusalem, residents were seen running for cover as sirens sounded in the city on Thursday. Some who were driving got out of their cars and ducked for cover near the guardrails, while medical personnel and others were seen taking shelter in a small room. The Iran-backed Houthi terrorist group in Yemen said they fired 2 missiles towards Israel, one at Israel's main airport and the other at an unspecified military target in the Tel Aviv area. However, Israeli forces said they intercepted 2 missiles that were fired from Yemen before they crossed into Israeli territory. And the United States is continuing military operations against the Houthis in Yemen. According to Houthi-run media, U.S. forces carried out a series of airstrikes on Wednesday, aimed at Houthi-controlled areas around Yemen's capital. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, where terrorists have also been firing rockets at Israel, Israeli forces reported killing a Hamas spokesperson. They said he was responsible for spreading propaganda about Hamas and inciting terrorist activities. And in Lebanon, Hezbollah terrorists have also resumed firing projectiles towards Israel. On Thursday, Israel reported striking several terrorists in Lebanon, including a battalion commander in Hezbollah's elite forces and 2 terrorists who were operating in southern Lebanon. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in Jerusalem on Thursday, where he said the attacks on Israel were a form of anti-Semitism.
Now this hatred has reemerged. It has reemerged through its radical Islamist carriers in Yemen, Iran, Lebanon, Gaza, and elsewhere. These anti-Semites wish to destroy not only the Jewish state, they seek to destroy the forces of modernity in the Arab and Muslim world.
Meanwhile, some residents in Israel continue to protest against Netanyahu and his decision to resume military operations in Gaza.
We have hostages in Gaza. We have a war in Gaza. My grandchildren are in Gaza, soldiers. I want all them back.
Meanwhile, Israeli forces are also continuing counterterrorism operations in the West Bank. They reported killing 2 terrorists there and also detaining 80 wanted suspects. Israeli forces have also been operating on the ground in Syria. They said this week that several terrorists in Syria opened fire on Israeli troops, who then returned fire before the Israeli Air Force struck the terrorists. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The United States and the European Union are at odds over the threat posed by Russia. While some EU countries fear a direct attack on their territories, the U.S. administration calls the idea unfounded. NTD's international correspondent David Vives reports from Paris.
French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot issued a stark warning on Thursday about the growing threat of Russian aggression in Europe, calling it not theoretical but very factual. This comes 3 days after U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff deemed fears of Russia seeking to occupy more of Ukraine or push into Europe as academic and unfounded. Other European countries such as Poland, Denmark and the Baltic states also fear a direct attack from Russia on their territories. Danish Defense Intelligence Service said in February that Russia might launch a large-scale war within 5 years. According to Benoît Paré, a former Ukraine surveyor for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Russia does not have the means to be a threat to Europe.
There's nothing that allows us to believe seriously that Russia could actually attack the European Union. I mean, Russia is already having a hard time just conquering 4 regions in Ukraine, 4 regions that were annexed to its territory by a referendum back in September 2022. Since then, there has been ongoing fights in those regions for very little result in terms of Russia conquering territory.
Paris says it would take years for Russia just to conquer additional territories in Ukraine. But European leaders remain unconvinced, he says.
The idea that Russia could invade the whole of Europe and have its tank reaching Paris sounds ludicrous. It doesn't seem to have any effect on the perception of the European leaders. It looks like no matter what happens, they are following this idea that Russia is a threat and we have to prepare for a major war with Russia. This is what they say.
French President Emmanuel Macron announced at a defense summit on Wednesday that France will provide over $2 billion in additional military aid to Ukraine. He and Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of reinterpreting and rewriting recent limited ceasefire deals. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said on Thursday that Western allies other than the US would be ready to put into operation any peace deal for Ukraine whenever its precise shape turns out to be. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Coming up, a Senate subcommittee reviews a report on January's mid-air collision and crash outside Reagan National Airport. Jason Blair has the key takeaways. The House has voted to pass the Deterrent Act. It targets foreign gift reporting for higher education. What are lawmakers saying about it? Melina Weiskup reports. And the Department of Education has launched an investigation into the California Department of Education's handling of student gender identity, which could impact school privacy policies nationwide. Christina Corona has more from Los Angeles after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A Senate subcommittee examines a report on January's mid-air collision that killed 67 people outside D.C.'s Reagan National Airport. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more.
57 days ago, our nation witnessed the first major U.S. commercial passenger flight crash in nearly 16 years.
The Senate Subcommittee on Aviation and Space discussed preliminary findings on the January 29th crash at Reagan Airport. Subcommittee Chair Senator Moran says that he has a lot of questions, including did the use of night vision goggles impact the pilot's vision, and why did the Blackhawk's invalid pressure altitude data influence other systems?
Why was the ADS-B out, not transmitting on the Blackhawk? Was it turned off or was there equipment malfunction? Why had precautions not been taken to mitigate the risk of collisions between commercial aircraft and rotor wing near DCA? What is the severity of this issue at other airports? What explains the discrepancy between the altitude readings?
Subcommittee ranking member Senator Duckworth says that there were many warning signs leading up to the crash.
Alarm bells about potential collisions have been ringing for years.
Senator Duckworth also said that there have been other crashes this year. We've
seen deadly crashes in Philadelphia and Alaska, a crash landing in Toronto that miraculously everyone survived. Earlier this month, we saw passengers standing on the wing of a 737 aircraft in Denver to escape a fire.
Senator Ted Cruz says that he discovered that there was counter-drone technology being improperly tested at DCA, which triggered urgent cockpit alerts and evasive pilot actions.
Let me just say this deeply disturbing that just a month after 67 people died while on approach to DCA, that the Secret Service and Pentagon would inadvertently cause multiple flights to receive urgent cockpit alerts recommending evasive action. It is inappropriate for such testing to occur at DCA.
Reporting on Capitol Hill, Jason Blair, NTD News.
The House this morning voted to pass the Deterrent Act, targeting foreign gift reporting for higher education. What are lawmakers saying about it? NTD's Melina Weiskup breaks it down.
The Deterrent Act would update reporting requirements for higher education facilities. Republicans have pushed this bill for years, saying that there's a lack of transparency, raising the issue about countries of concern like the Chinese Communist Party using bribes to gain influence and promote propaganda in U.S. colleges and universities.
In April 2023, the former chair of Harvard University's Chemistry and Chemical Biology Department was sentenced to prison for lying about his affiliation with and income from Wuhan University of Technology in Wuhan, China. In July 2024, University of Maryland College Park paid $500,000 for failing to disclose foreign funding from the Chinese companies of 3 researchers.
Alfred University recently received a grant from the Department of Defense to research hypersonic weapons. Unbelievably, the China University of Geosciences in Wuhan then partnered with Alfred University with this research. China University of Geosciences also happened to be doing very similar weapons research for the CCP. How do we know that our research and development in hypersonic weapons isn't going straight to the CCP? The answer is it probably is.
Some opposing Democrats, however, say it would burden higher education facilities and further the issue of racism and xenophobia.
But the Deterrent Act would burden our higher ed institutions and federal agencies with massive amounts of reporting of a gift of any value from foreign countries and would cast a chilling effect disproportionately on the Asian American academic community.
Now that it's out of the House, it moves on to the Senate, where Republicans also have control, making it an easier path to President Trump's desk. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
The Department of Education has launched an investigation into California's new law on student gender identity, arguing it may violate federal privacy rules. This comes during a broader national debate over parental rights versus student privacy in schools. NTD's Christina Corona has the details.
The U.S. Department of Education has launched an investigation into the California Department of Education for potential violations of the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. FERPA gives parents the right to access their children's educational records. A new California law, AB 1955, prohibits school staff from informing parents about a student's gender identity without the student's consent. But federal officials argue this could stop California from following student privacy laws. Education Secretary Linda McMahon stated that teachers and counselors should not influence minors on major decisions about sexual identity and mental health. In Thursday's news release, she said it is not only immoral but also potentially in contradiction with federal law for California schools to hide crucial information about a student's well-being from parents and guardians. The agency launched today's investigation to vigorously protect parents' rights and to ensure that students do not fall victim to radical transgender ideology that often leads to family alienation and irreversible medical interventions. In response, Governor Gavin Newsom issued a statement on X saying, under California law, minors cannot legally change their name or gender without parental consent, and parents are guaranteed the right to access their students' educational records. He assured that AB 1955 does not allow teachers or schools to hide information from parents, but ensures staff focus on teaching and aren't forced to disclose a student's LGBTQ+ identity without parental consent or a request for records. Last month, California Attorney General Rob Bonta vowed to protect state educators and LGBTQ+ students from Trump administration threats, affirming that California's inclusive school laws remain in place. We spoke with one parent who wished to remain off camera, who shared their belief that parents should be informed about their child's gender identity, saying, withholding this information would violate parental rights and limit their involvement in their child's life. Another parent said that their perspective on gender is rooted in their interpretation of the Bible, stating that whatever the Bible says about gender is what they believe to be right. While many supporters argue that forced disclosure could put students at risk, especially in unsupportive homes, the debate highlights a broader national conflict over parental rights and student privacy. The final decision may shape how schools across the country handle private student information in the future. Violations of FERPA can result in the loss of federal funding for educational institutions. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
Coming up, how will President Trump's auto tariffs impact domestic car makers and American consumers? What kind of effects will they have in the long run? A finance professor and public policy analyst joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The United Auto Workers are applauding President Trump's tariffs on truck and car imports. The UAW yesterday called it a victory for auto workers. In a statement, UAW said the 25% tariffs on auto imports signals a return to policies that prioritize the workers who build this country. The union also said it marked the end of, quote, the free trade disaster that has devastated working class communities for decades. The president said yesterday the tariffs will take effect on April 2nd. Trump said it would lead to the construction of auto plants and a boom in employment. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt commented on this issue this morning.
Well, I won't get ahead of the president on any additional tariffs. As you know, on April 2nd, there will be the reciprocal tariff announcement, which is going to focus on countries particularly that have been ripping off the United States. The president said yesterday he thinks that some of these numbers will be more conservative than many people are expecting. But we're going to make sure that American workers are put first, and we're ending the unfair trade practices that have been hollowing out our middle class for decades. And I would just like to emphasize these auto tariffs yesterday are a big deal for auto workers in the industry. And you saw the United Auto Workers Union, Sean Fain, who wasn't the greatest fan of the president on the campaign trail, came out this morning and applauded the president for this move, saying it's a great thing for auto workers who have been sold out by unfair trade practices. So the president is determined to rebuild our manufacturing base. We want more jobs, more products made right here in the United States, which means more money in the pockets of the American people at the end of the day.
Countries that export vehicles to the U.S. are reacting to President Trump's auto tariffs. Japan and Canada both vowed to deliver a strong response.
We are one of the biggest investors in the United States. In fact, we are number one. When we consider this, is it right that all countries are treated the same? We have been making this point and will continue to do so. We must consider the appropriate response to this announcement. Naturally, all options are on the table.
Now, the President of the United States is trying to fundamentally restructure his economy. It means our economy, and it means the global economy as well. And I understand and respect his goal to support American workers, but I disagree with him that this is how to help them. With time, it will become apparent that these actions will end up hurting American workers and American consumers. I reject any attempts to weaken Canada, to wear us down, to break us so that America can own us. That will never happen. And our response to these latest tariffs is to fight, is to protect, and to build.
Canada earlier announced retaliatory tariffs amounting to over $100 billion. Prime Minister Carney said they would be imposed in stages depending on what President Trump did. In Japan, automakers' shares fell sharply in early trade today. Automobiles made up around 28% of Japan's total exports to the U.S. last year. Joining us now to discuss the possible impacts of President Trump's auto tariffs is Michael Busler. He's a professor of finance at Stockton University and also a public policy analyst. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you here. Now, first, how do you read this move? What's the likely impact on car makers here at home?
So let me first start off by saying I'm a free market economist. I don't like tariffs on any products from any country. However, it was decided, governments sort of said, well, we should have some tariffs. It just seems right. So we'll use a 2.5% tariff. And that's what the U.S. did on products coming into the U.S. forever. The problem was the other countries didn't do that. The European Union sells cars in the U.S. We charge a 2.5% tariff. They charge a 10% tariff. And then they have a value-added tax that adds even more. China, we charge anything made there, brought into the U.S., 2.5% tariff. They charge a 25% tariff on automobiles, 50% tariff on Corvettes for some reason. India, they place 100% tariff on motorcycles. Harley-Davidson, a big supplier in India, decided to go to India and build a plant. So President Trump has said, we want the playing field to be even. We want reciprocal tariffs on most products. Now, with certain key products like steel, aluminum, and automobiles, he said, look, we need to have automobiles made here in the U.S. So he put a tariff on automobiles imported into the U.S. The result will be that companies, American companies, will make more cars in the U.S. Foreign companies, Honda has already announced that we're going to build a plant in Mexico. It's going to go in Indiana. Hyundai is going to build a steel producing plant and a car manufacturing plant in the U.S. Trump wants to bring back manufacturing to the U.S. His actions will cause a little pain to consumers in the short term, but in the long term, it will result in our manufacturing base being rebuilt again, more jobs for Americans, and in the long run, stable prices.
Now, in terms of the markets, we saw shares in, say, GM, Ford, and Stellantis all took a tumble at the news, but the White House is saying this move will raise $100 billion in annual revenue down the road. Now, that being said, Tesla and Rivian stocks went up. What do you see automakers and the markets doing next? Will we start to see that manufacturing in the auto sector come to America?
So, according to President Trump, American automobile manufacturers that produce cars in the U.S. are only running at about 65% of capacity. If that's the case, they're going to ramp up to 100% capacity as soon as possible. And they are likely to start adding a second and perhaps even a third shift to start producing many more American cars. They expect a huge increase in demand because the foreign cars will now be at least 25% more. So they expect a huge increase in demand that will cause more American jobs to be created. And again, in the long run, it's better for the U.S. to have a good, solid manufacturing base. He's about to put tariffs on steel and aluminum. Those are very vital products. Our steel industry and aluminum industry is doing very poorly here. So he'll put the tariff on. That will mean that it will now be cheaper to produce steel in the U.S. You'll see U.S. steel being ramped up, aluminum companies being ramped up, and will make the products here. In the short run, though, it will cause some upward pressure on price. A tariff is like a tax, and it adds to the cost of the product, tends to raise the price. Trump says, I'll be able to offset any inflationary impact by vastly increasing the supply of energy. And when you increase the supply of anything, the price comes down. Energy prices, he expects to be cut in half by the end of the year, and that will offset any inflationary impacts of these tariffs, is what his plan is.
I want to get to the consumer impact, but first, in terms of, say, foreign companies moving to the U.S., as you mentioned earlier, Korean automaker Hyundai announcing plans to make a $21 billion investment in the U.S., which includes building a nearly $6 billion steel plant in Louisiana. How likely are we to see other foreign car manufacturers follow their lead?
Very likely. The foreign car manufacturers need us more than we need them, and they can't afford to have a big chunk of their sales be lost because of these higher prices. So you're going to see a lot of these foreign car manufacturers move to the U.S. to start making cars, and again, that will increase the manufacturing base of the U.S. In the long term. That's very positive for us.
Now, zooming out a bit in terms of foreign leaders, some have responded. Of course, Canada's Prime Minister calling this a very direct attack, adding they'll defend the country, as in Canada. Now, Japan, on the other hand, calling this unfair, asking for an exemption from these tariffs. What do you anticipate from countries in response to these tariffs? Reciprocal tariffs or onshoring?
So Mexico has reacted positively to this, and they're working things out. Canada cannot afford a 25% tariff on their products that they sell to the U.S. Why is that? Their GDP roughly is about 2.1 trillion. About 18% of their output, almost 400 billion products sold to the U.S. If the 25% tariff stays in place and their sales to the U.S. drop from, say, 400 to 300, that's 5% of their output. That'll cause their economy to go into recession. Worse yet is they're going to reciprocate, and they'll put tariffs on U.S. products sold in Canada, which are mostly consumer goods that their consumers are likely to still buy, and that will be inflationary. So they could end up with a recession and inflation. That's a stagflation issue, which is the worst economic problem to have. President Trump, with Canada in particular, is using this as a negotiating tool. In Canada, they put quotas on how much of our agricultural products we can sell. And if we want to sell above the quota, their tariff is 100 or 200%. So it's keeping our manufacture, particularly in the agricultural sector, out of Canada. All President Trump wants to do is, he says, look, we should all have the same tariff. He's a free market person too. He'd rather not have any tariffs. But if you're going to have some tariffs, everybody should charge the same. That would be more of a free market situation. He calls it reciprocal. So we'll reciprocate to what you do to us. The long-term goal here is to bring tariffs down as low as possible for all countries, for all products. This is the first step in getting there.
And Michael, as you were mentioning a bit earlier about consumers, how do you see this playing out in the short term? Will more households and families get priced out of the new car market, as some opponents of Trump's policies say?
Yeah, so car prices will go up. The foreign car prices will go up because of the tariffs. The domestically produced cars will go up in price too, because there'll be a big increase in demand because people can't afford the foreign cars. So car prices will go up in the short term. In the longer term, we'll have more stable prices and more production in the U.S. And again, Trump says, I'll offset any inflationary impact of the tariff by significantly dropping the cost of energy. Energy accounts directly for about 7% of the consumer price index, indirectly almost 30%, because it affects the cost of producing goods and services. So Trump's plan is there may be some short-term pain, but there will be much better long-term gain, more growth in the economy, more price stability, and more security, because we now produce our own aluminum and steel and cars and products that are vital to national security.
Very fascinating. Michael Busler, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Look forward to doing it again.
And coming up in college basketball, the Sweet 16 gets underway in just a couple of minutes. Dave Martin joins us live on site to discuss. And Shen Performing Arts brings the magic of ancient China to life in New York City, captivating the audience on opening night. Find out what audience members had to say when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin, who's on location in Newark, New Jersey, the site of the East Regional semifinals in the NCAA Sweet 16. Good evening, Dave. Now you've got two games there tonight, including one with #1 ranked Duke. What is the status of Duke's injured forward Malik Brown?
Yeah, he's going to be a game-time decision, actually, and that's the later game tonight. So should Duke need it, they've got a few more hours still to decide. Now, Brown, very good defensive player. The guy's about 6'9", 220, so he can guard guys not only in the paint, but he's also fast enough and agile enough to guard also guys on the perimeter. One of the very few players probably in the NCAA that can guard all 5 positions. Now, he injured his shoulder a couple weeks ago in the ACC tournament against Georgia Tech. Now, if you remember, that was the same game that Cooper Flagg got injured. Flagg, their All-American, though, he returned last week. Brown, though, still out. Now, these two teams, Duke and Arizona, played earlier this year. Duke won actually by 14 points. They held All-American Caleb Love to just 8 points. That was like half his season average. So this should be a very exciting game tonight. Duke is 10-point favorites to win the game.
And Dave, in the first game tonight, it'll be Alabama against BYU. What are you expecting in that matchup?
Yeah, a lot of scoring. Alabama leads the country in points per game, 90 points per game. BYU is not too far behind at 81. But Bama, though, I'm not quite sure what to expect from them. They've actually lost 5 out of the last 11 games, which is kind of a lot for a team that's got a #2 seed. But 4 of those losses were to top 10 teams, such as life in the loaded SEC. BYU, meanwhile, they've won 11 of their last 12 games. Now, these two teams did not play each other this year, but they do have a common opponent. Both teams lost to Ole Miss by about the same margin earlier this year, so I'm expecting a close matchup. And actually, this game starts in about 25 minutes, so a lot of excitement here, Tiff. Got some good games on tap.
All right, well, Dave, I'll let you go watch those games, but thanks for joining us. Shen Performing Arts delighted audiences on their opening night at the Lincoln Center in New York City. Theatergoers shared their reflections after taking on a journey through ancient China. Let's take a look.
It's extraordinary, the
The dancing and the choreography and the costumes are just breathtaking.
This is a divine experience. It's incredible. Never seen anything like this. The dancers are so precise. The music is perfect.
Well, I liked it very much. I think it was powerful. I'm very impressed by the dancing.
And I really enjoy with the big screen in the back and coming from the stage to the screen, that gives it a really, gives it a lot more depth, so it's something that makes it more enjoyable for me anyway.
The spectacle of it, the scale of it, the sheer number of performers, the synchronicity of the performances, it's unbelievable.
Since 2006, Shen has toured the world with a mission to revive 5,000 years of divinely inspired traditional Chinese culture from a time before communism. And every season, its artists bring an all-new program with original dance, music, costumes, and backdrops.
Everyone needs to come and see Shen Yun, educationally wise, culturally wise. It is a very important part of Chinese history, overall culture and history for our world, and important to Americans also.
And everybody always thinks what they had was better than what they have now, but you have to teach the next generation that. And I think this shows that you guys are doing it very well.
Shen Yun will continue to perform at Lincoln Center in New York City until April 12th. NTD News, New York.
And NTD is a proud media sponsor of Shen Yun. That's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.